The world is beautiful. Now, I'm not saying this as some grand or poetic claim, but just as a starter. I think we can all agree that experiencing being alive, being conscious, is not a bad experience at all. After all, consciousness is all there is. It's not something we can have or not have. It's the lens through which this entire world exists for us. Now, as a kid, trying to understand all of this has always been a struggle for me. This idea that something so complex and remarkable like human consciousness can be condensed into understanding neural signaling or interacting molecules never sat quite right with me. And I always wanted there to be something more, and found myself in this loophole where I was trying to understand the mind using the very mind I was trying to explain. And this is a very frustrating experience. And at one point, I think I had to, and we as humans have to just accept that human consciousness is something we may never understand, something impossible, until it's not. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, because scientists are beginning to uncover the properties of human consciousness and its greatest flaw. Because what if I told you that everything you are perceiving right now, your reality, your experience, is in some way fake? Now, I know I sound crazy right now, like I'm going to present about some simulation theory, glitch in the Matrix, or some idea I read out of a science fiction novel. But no, it's something real, something true, and quite frankly, a bit more unsettling. So before I throw my entire audience into an existential crisis on a 6 p.m. on Thursday, allow me to explain using a very simple example. Say you are observing a dog. Here's my dog, and here's my best representation of the human conscious mind. Now, every second, tens of millions of bits of sensory information enter your eyes as light, which is, in theory, enough to describe any scene, this dog, in incredible detail. So the story we like to tell is simple. Light goes in, the brain processes it, and out comes our internal representation of the dog. But this story is wrong, because out of the millions of bits of sensory information that enter our eyes every second, only about 40 ever reach our conscious experience. Now, to put that into perspective, this is 0.0001% of all initial sensory input from which our brain somehow has to construct this experience. How is this possible? And the remarkable part, we still see the same dog, the exact same dog. Now, I'll come back to this later, but for now, what I need you to understand is that the human brain is simply horrible at perceiving reality. We are never just passively constructing this internal world because we simply don't have enough sensory information to do so. Not because some of the information is discarded because of its unimportance, but because our lazy brain simply doesn't have enough time and energy to go through each piece of information and decide on what to use. So this answers some questions, but not all. How on earth are we still seeing this dog? How on earth are we still able to construct our inner world with so little information? As you sit here right now and you look around, you look at your hands, you look at this guy presenting this TED Talk, everything feels real. So what's going on? The question now shifts from what is human consciousness to how does it work with virtually nothing? Now, you'll be pleased to hear that this question can be answered using a mathematical equation from grade 11 IB mathematics. You may have heard of it before. It's called Bayes' theorem, or in the language of neuroscience, Bayesian inference. Now, let's use our trusted example of the dog again. When you are observing a scene, when you see this dog, Your brain has to come up with an infinite number of possible hypotheses that could explain this unfiltered, noisy, ambiguous sensory data. Your brain then asks itself one simple question. What is the probability of my hypothesis being true given my sensory data? In other words, what's the probability that I'm observing this dog given this little sensory data that I'm receiving? Now, to solve for this, the brain starts with what it already knows. The prior probability. In other words, what's the probability of seeing dogs in general, right? If I'm on the street and I see a dog in the distance, I'm not sure, I can very vaguely make it out. It could be a dog, could be a wolf, could be a deer, I'm not sure what it is, but this probability is likely to be 1 or close to 1. Whereas if I'm on Mars and I see something in the distance, the probability that it's a dog is very low. Now, this term is multiplied by the likelihood probability. This probability basically says, given my sensory data, given my hypothesis was true, what is the probability of my sensory data ever occurring? Now, in other words, very simply put, this term is the little sensory data we are receiving. Now, both of these terms are now divided by what is called the normalization constant. And this accounts for all of the other possible explanations of the scene which is in front of us. Could be a dog, could be a shadow, could be a wolf, could be a helicopter, unlikely, but whatever, you get my point. There's an infinite number of explanations for the limited sensory data we're perceiving. And this is it. This is the equation that models human consciousness. So simple, yet so complex and so incredible. So consciousness isn't reality itself. It's a best guess at it. We are never just perceiving the world, taking it in. We are actively constructing our experience. Now, I hope some of you are asking yourself, how is it possible that something like this prior probability can directly change what we are perceiving? How can it directly change what we are seeing? Sure, whether we've seen a dog before or not may change what we think about when we see one, but how can it actually change what we see? I'm sure many of you have seen this dress before, so I want you to raise your hand if you see the colors white and gold. Now I want you to raise your hand if you see black and blue. Interesting. We are all exposed to the exact same sensory input, and yet somehow we create two different realities. It's pretty incredible. And this dress is in fact black and blue. I don't believe it, but does this mean some of us are experiencing a wrong perception? Well, no, kind of, not wrong, but different. Perception, in a way, is very subjective. When we are exposed to reliable, clean sensory input, our perceptions as different humans tend to converge. But as soon as something changes, as soon as there is some ambiguous data, we all experience different realities. And if I want you to take away one thing from this talk, I want you to understand that while perception and reality seem mutually exclusive, by changing your perception, you can change your reality, sometimes figuratively and sometimes quite literally. Thank you.